Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I am staff writer Cody Goodwin, along with fellow, or I guess senior writer. I always forget kind of what everybody's title is. Alex Scarborough. Just two of us here today on the 69th episode of Roll Pod. Very nice. We have a very nice show in store for you guys today. We're going to talk about a couple of stories that Alex has written over the past couple of weeks, and then we're going to draft Alabama's 2024 schedule. Just kind of an easy way here in late May to discuss the schedule that is really, we're only 3 months out from week one. Like starting Thursday, we're recording this on a Wednesday. Starting Thursday, we're 100 days out from week one, which is kind of exciting. Before we get to all that, Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. You are kind of blowing my mind that we're only 100 days out. And it's, I guess it's just because Saban retiring just threw off, like the earth tilted on its axis. And the whole calendar of what I think an off season is supposed to be is just, it's thrown out. You've got the transition, spring practice, the transfer portal, which is closed but still lingering. It's just so much still going on, which is, I mean, good for football content, I guess, but it's just thrown off. Like we're sitting here in late May almost, and we've still got a lot to get to. We haven't dissected the schedule 15 times yet.
Yeah, the combination of like college football schedule, right? Like, because we had the season and then the portal was open in December and then like the playoff and bowl season. And then, oh, by the way, Saban decided to retire and how all of that just kind of bled into Alabama's basketball run, like just kind of the up and downness of that schedule. And then like, like I came back to A-Day, like after doing the whole basketball thing. So like, we just like really haven't stopped, right? Because then after A-Day, the portal opened up and it's just like, college football is almost becoming like the NFL where it's like, do we have a reason to be relevant this month? Okay, let's spam that button and do it.
Well, and I'd argue there are even more ways that they could like market in a TV way, the transfer portal, all these things. I think they could even draw it out more if they want to. But yeah, it's I guess it's good for content. It's not great for our respective families, but what are you going to do? It's still fun. We're still talking about football. We can't complain too much.
Yeah, right. Because like what June is like coming up soon, and like the SEC, I'm pretty sure like announces like the full slate of their schedule sometime that month.
Most of it will be out in terms of timing. Yeah.
Yeah. Then SEC Media Days in July, and then next thing you know, fall camp, and then away we go. So it's like the footballification of America continues at all levels. Like I can't wait to see how they just make the high school game grow more, and we're just going to be surrounded by football at all times. Not that I'm mad about it. We'll do our part in the footballification of America here with this show. Wanted to talk to you about a couple of stories that you wrote this week, Alex. First off, the offensive line masterminds or OL masterminds based in Dallas, a trio of Alabama offensive linemen went out to work with Duke Manyweather, who's the head of scouting and development and OL masterminds. Basically, just kind of a place for offensive linemen to go and get some extra offseason training in, get some like expert critiques and, work on their technique and things of that nature. And, trio of Alabama offensive linemen, Tyler Booker, Caden Proctor, and Wilkin Formby all went out there to get some work in. You got to talk with Manyweather, kind of pick his brain a little bit. What'd you learn from that conversation and just, seeing that Alabama sent a few, or maybe not sent, but they, went on their own volition to go get some training in?
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? And you start with O-line masterminds as a whole. Like this is a professional thing. When we think of like personal trainers, we think of quarterback coaches, right? But it's every position now. And this is one of the elite ones. They work with a lot of draft prospects. I think they had 14 players drafted in this last class. The veterans that they work with are like Zach Martin, Teron Armstead, like Lane Johnson. We're talking about big time guys. And I got on the phone with Duke, who was gracious enough to give me his time and perspective. And right off the bat, hammering home the fact that, look, I mean, we're going to get into how good these players are, but like we really need to state that this is like one of the rare times off they have. Like this is not pro sports. College sports, you have as an athlete almost no time off. They took 10 days to go to Dallas and their own money, which is not insignificant amount of money, to go do this to get better during their time off. And Duke said, look, NIL is great. And you see these guys use it for going on vacation and like yachts and like balling out, and good for them. But like it really says something about Wilkin, Caden, and Tyler that they want to reinvest in themselves. They want to get better. So you kind of start there. And then you hear more about the program, a very big emphasis on the mental aspect of things. Everything has to go back to film, nutrition, diet, body balance, all of these things that can just get you better incrementally. And then, obviously talk to Duke about like his thoughts on each of those guys and just, top level on them. Like Tyler, a guy who obviously has a ton of ability, but Duke told me, look, he's not a finished product. He's got so much further to go in terms of fundamentals, stance, all of those things. He can obviously maul you physically, and you have to have that. Like that's why he can be a first round pick. But he's got room to improve, which is exciting, right? And then with Caden, the first thing I asked him is like, you see these guys all the time. This guy's been away from a team setting. We've talked about this on the pod before. What's the effect of that? And he said, couldn't tell. Like honestly, like just so athletic, so well conditioned. I won't use the words because they're too colorful, but he's like, look, this blankety blank was not sitting around doing nothing. Like very impressed and hammered home the fact that despite the freshman struggles, he's like, this dude is Tristan Wirfs, and not just because of the Iowa connection. Like he's got those traits. He can be a top pick. Like we're talking number one kind of pick. He's got that potential, and I think some people need to remember that. Like he was a 5-star for a reason. And then the guy who blew me away in terms of the feedback was Wilkin Formby. I think a lot of people probably had that takeaway because we don't really know a lot about Wilkin, right? He's a local guy, 4-star, kind of wonder where he's going to be at in the depth chart. And he said, look, this guy has a pro mentality, understands the game, understands the work ethic, has the perfect mindset for this. And oh, by the way, he's huge and has this salty demeanor that you love as an O line coach. He said, once he gets playing time, whenever that is, watch out because this dude has the ability to be a pro. And I think if you're an Alabama fan wondering about depth in the future and all those things, I don't think necessarily he's a guy who's going to start this year. Maybe he pushes Elijah Pritchett, but you have to feel good about the future when you hear those kind of things.
Yeah, well, and especially like, I mean, you laid out the credentials of this guy, Duke Manyweather, and just what he's been able to do with OL masterminds and the guys he's been able to coach. If he's saying that about Wilkin Formby, like that's got to get you a little bit excited, right? And it also kind of projects maybe a little bit, if he's the starter, cool, like that's awesome. You get to see the local guy in the starting lineup. If he's not, one, tells you a little bit about Elijah Pritchett and just the natural talent that he has, but two, like, now you kind of have a little bit of a swing tackle, or at least that's kind of how I'm thinking of this. Like if Formy's not able to get into the starting lineup, now you've got a backup tackle, right? And I think a lot of people are also high on Miles McVay. We'll kind of see how he factors into the right tackle competition. But like now you've got some other dudes that like, okay, if something happens or if coaches aren't seeing what they like, you got another guy there that you can kind of slide into the starting lineup to either solve the problem or potentially spell the starter, or if somebody gets hurt. Like there's a lot of encouraging things that came out of what he said. At least that was one of my takeaways from reading your story.
Yeah, because I mean, I think we all feel pretty good about the starting offensive line. It's the question of depth, and it's a long season. It's the SEC. I mean, we're going to talk about the schedule. It's going to tear some dudes up. And I'm not predicting injuries, but you need to have depth, even if it's a guy coming on for a couple series. And if he's a guy, again, he's got to develop. He's got to get reps. But if he has those traits, and I'm inclined to believe Duke and other guys you talk to who are high on him, it's really encouraging. We'll get into some other stuff, but like the adding Gito to Van DeMark, you get Parker Brailsford back. Pieces are coming together for this line to be, I think, better than we expected a couple of months ago.
Yeah. Well, and you hit on the point, why do you need depth? Like there's, Alabama had plenty of experience last year utilizing that depth, right? Jace McClellan wasn't available a little bit at running back. Roy Dale Williams was able to step in. Jam Miller was able to shine. The secondary, right? Like I'm thinking of the SEC championship game when Kool-Aid goes out with what was probably a concussion. Trey Amos steps in. Trey Amos is no longer on the roster, but he stepped in and played very, very well in that game. So those are just two small examples. And now you're seems like there are more examples of that along the offensive line. You mentioned Vandemark coming in as kind of the interior swing guy. They could have multiple options at tackle. Not something I don't think we would have said probably as early as a month ago, just kind of, looking at the depth chart and what do we know? What do we don't know? Like we had a lot more questions, I think, than not. And so, getting this, from Duke, should inspire, I guess, a little bit of confidence in the fan base.
Yeah, and we've talked about it on the pod before. Getting Caden Proctor back was huge in itself, but it unlocked the rest of the offensive line. It really gave you options at tackle and let you be a little bit more specific in what you wanted to do in the transfer portal. A lot easier to go find an interior lineman than it is to go find an interior lineman and a tackle. So it gave them more options, and I think that was really the starting point for the improvement. They still have to show a lot, but again, I feel like I'm a broken record because I've said it a million times. This line's been so disappointing for a couple of years and underperforming to what we think their talent is that I think I have a little bit more confidence in what they're going to be in terms of a coaching perspective, in terms of development perspective, and then oh by the way, the pieces are there too. So I feel good about the line right now. Now, see, it is only May.
101 days from week 1. That's when we'll start to learn the truth about these guys. Talking about the roster here, specifically the offensive line, you also had another story where you got to sit down with Kalen DeBoer one-on-one. And I enjoyed it because, one, you kind of gave us a little bit, some details about the office that he's changing, right? He took over Nick Saban's office, and then he just decided to redo the whole thing, like out with the wood, in with some new glass paneling. Like, it's just going to look totally different. And you also talked to him just about the roster as a whole and just basically straight up asked him, like, hey, this is a playoff caliber roster. And he seems to believe so. Like, was that, what'd you maybe think of his answer there? And what was maybe some other, what was the ultimate or other takeaways from your sit down with DeBoer?
Yeah, it was not surprising to see the confidence because he's a quietly confident guy. Like, you talk to people around him and he's not going to be outwardly boastful or anything like that, but he believes in this team. And I think he believes in what they accomplished in the portal, which was exactly what they needed to do, which was depth, depth, depth. But beyond that, getting guys who can give you multiple years, whether you're talking about a Cam Howard, a King Mack, a Geno Vandemark, guys who might not just be 1 year rentals. Deshaun Jones could be that guy, but he also, because he's got some years in, maybe could be gone after this year. Yeah, I asked him, basically, was this a playoff team before the portal and after? And he didn't really go into before, but I think he feels very strongly that after the additions they've made, that they are in that position. And he told me, look, a year ago he felt that way. Proved right with Washington, got all the way to a national championship game. So he sees the pieces that are there. He knows what getting Caden back meant for the offensive line. He's confident in what Geno Vandemark can be this year and what he can be in future years. And that's reading between the lines. But there's a lot of confidence, and there's a lot of confidence too in being able to retain the players they did. I think he felt a lot of pride in that. They had 15 practices to show them what they were about, and that's basically their pitch coming in. It was like, look, stay put, see what we're going to do, and the attrition was pretty minimal, right? Like, you didn't lose a guy with starting experience. Brockermeyer was the big one, but a year ago he was third string center.
Yeah.
So on paper, not the biggest loss in the world. And again, reiterating that Parker is going to be around. So a lot of confidence that this team has the pieces, but also understanding and saying, look, we've got the culture thing we've got to figure out. We've got to do all the right things in the summer. We got to be what we need to be in the fall. We got to play physical. We got to do X, Y, and Z. You can't just have potential. Potential gets you nowhere. So a lot of quiet confidence there, and just an overall big picture. Just getting to know a guy who, his first time getting to sit down with him in his office, which is a familiar room for us, the media room. He joked when I first walked in there, "You want me to get up on the podium? I can answer questions from there." Like, no, it's gonna be a little awkward. But like, very much a guy who's taking this whole thing in stride and doesn't seem overwhelmed by it. And you start looking at digging into his background, and you can see why, right? Like, Bob Young is a legend at Sioux Falls. Followed him, had him looking over his shoulder. Jeff Tedford, the handoff was, in a way, could have been temporary, still around, had to take a leave of absence for health, looking over his shoulder. Goes to Washington. Chris Peterson is very much around. This isn't totally unfamiliar to him. Now he's got more talent and more expectations, and he understands that. But he's a guy who, my big takeaway is, like, he's ready for this. Like, he wants to get to week 1. He's confident in what they have and believes that they can get things done. Milrow's a big one. He's talked about it a lot, but feels better about the pass rush than maybe some other people do. There's some football things that maybe we can get into, some stories I will be writing in the coming weeks, but really good sit down with him. I really appreciate him making the time. It's good to get to know these guys because he's all the way out in Washington and other stops in between. Kind of unfamiliar to a lot of people, including myself.
Yeah, he and it's funny, you talk about that quiet confidence. If this guy is confident in what he sees on the roster, like I am inclined to maybe follow that confidence a little bit, at least right now as we're sitting here in late May. Because you think about what he did at Washington, right? Like it ended up being a very talented roster, right? 10 Washington players were just selected in the NFL draft. Like we're not saying that there was not talent on that roster, but you look at, one of the things we kind of use to measure, how talented is this roster is, 247's team talent composite, which is not a perfect science, right? Because it doesn't really take into account overall development, but it does kind of give you a sense of like, okay, where were these guys rated coming out of high school? That sort of thing, right? Like how many 3, 4, 5 stars do these guys have on the roster? You look at the 2023 team talent composite. Alabama was obviously number 1, right? Washington was number 26. They didn't have a single 5-star on that roster. Went 14-0, made it to the national championship game, ultimately had 10, draft picks, and 2 of them went in the top 10 with Roman Dunze and Michael Penix Jr. You know, obviously taking advantage of the transfer portal, and he got his guys in there, and they also had Scott Huff and Ryan Grubb, who, those guys plus DeBoer, like that's a lot of one really good offensive line minds in the same room, but also just like a lot of really good, just offensive minds in general. So there's a lot of things that maybe played into Washington's success last year, but like if he's able to take a team that's as talented as that, and now he is here at Alabama, which, I don't think anybody's going to argue that there's, Alabama, you got a higher floor when you're dealing with the amount of talent that you have at Alabama. And he feels good after seeing what he did at Washington. Like, I'm inclined to feel pretty good too. Like, like at least, maybe I, am until I see it, right? Or until we see it, like I'm gonna kind of follow his lead here a little bit, right? Because he does have that quiet confidence about him, and he's also been very honest about what they needed to do, and kind of like we said earlier, like when it came to the portal, promises made, promises kept. So I don't know, like I felt encouraged about, or at least more encouraged about the roster after reading your story, and especially like sitting here listening to you continue to talk about the sit down that you had with him.
Yeah, and it's not just the talent component, right? Washington was a dumpster fire when he took over. It was a mess of a program that got ruined. Ruined's probably not too strong a word, in a very short period of time. And the ability to turn that thing around in a hurry and retain the players they did and bring in the players they did speaks to a culture, right? And speaks to this ability to connect. And we've heard from players about this. Like, it's not demeaning what Saban did, but it's a very different relationship now between coach and player in a positive way, that they feel like he's more on maybe their level. Um, and I think that speaks to what they've been able to do in terms of retention, bringing players in, but it's also a judgment on what they did in the past. And I'll say this, like you talk about staff and all of that, what they had in Washington. It strikes me that this is a guy who's had multiple stops and gone a bunch of different places and learned and grown and come to this point in his career where he's a top 5 coach in the country, gets the biggest job maybe there is in Alabama, taking over for Nick Saban, and he still continues to surround himself with familiar faces. He's got guys who've been with him for a really long time, and I don't think Huff and Grubb leave for anything other than a great opportunity in the Seahawks. So it speaks to his relationships with his coaches too. Like, if you spend any amount of time around Kalen, he gushes over these guys. He believes in them so much and empowers them and trusts them. There is oversight. This is not a CEO. This is a guy who will get into the details, but very confident in what they have. Even guys we have question marks with, right? Like Nick Sheridan believes fully in them and really exudes confidence to where it's like, okay, it's got to happen on the football field. But um, the continuity he's able to keep, and then retaining some people from Saban's staff, I think it's been a good mix and could lead to positive results.
Yeah. Excited to see how all of this unfolds. Again, 101 days away from week 1. Speaking of the schedule, let's get into the meat of today's show. We are going to draft Alabama's 2024 schedule. What does that mean? We're basically going to go through the 12 games on the schedule, and Alex and I are going to go back and forth and just pick the games that we are most excited about, most intrigued by, the games that we think will be the best games. And we're just going to kind of rank them, but also we're going to pick the games, right? And there's really no other parameters other than that. Other than whenever Alex picks a game, I obviously can't pick that one. And we're just going to go down the list of 12 and, easy way to talk about the schedule, being 100 and some days away from week one. So Alex, I'll defer to you. You've got the first overall pick in the schedule draft. Which game you starting with?
Yeah, I feel like I'm the Chicago Bears. It's Caleb Williams. It's done. Like, it's Georgia. I mean, Georgia's going to be the game. It's going to be nuts. Now Alabama has to get through 3 games to get there, but that's going to be an enormous game in Bryant-Denny, and the biggest measuring stick kind of test that Kalen DeBoer will get, because it's Nick's guy. It's Kirby. It's the king of the SEC right now, because of Nick Saban stepping away. I don't think there's really any doubt about that. They have a program that is rolling. I think will be preseason number 1. Get Carson Beck back. Still some good pieces on defense. I think their wide receivers are going to be much improved. Questions about their offensive line and running game a little bit, but their talent is incredible. Closest thing to what Alabama's had the last few years. And I think you hear from fans, they're the program that I think Alabama is going to be measuring themselves against day in and day out. So to get that game at home early in the schedule, primetime game, going to be absolutely great to see Jalen Milroe versus that defense. How far has he come? I think we'll get glimpses of that in the games before. We won't get anything like what's going to happen week 4. It's going to be really fun to watch, I think.
No, I agree. This was the obvious choice at number 1, right? So, and there's so many different things that make this interesting, right? Because it's week 4. There's enough time there for both teams to kind of settle in and figure out, maybe not everything, but a lot of things, like where are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what do we need to avoid, what do we need to spam, right? Georgia lost Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers, but you mentioned Carson Beck. They've got Dom Levitt back. The spine of their defense with Stackhouse and who's that linebacker? Michael Williams, and then Malachi Starks is there. KJ Bolden's also going to be there. He'll probably play a lot as a true freshman this year. So just talent all over the board. They're probably, I would argue probably preseason number 2, because Ohio State's roster just looks nasty, but interchangeable 1A, 1B. But yeah, that is, that's going to be the standard for Alabama. At the same time, Alabama's going to have some fun tests their first 3 weeks. Then they're going to get a bye before they play Georgia. There's going to be, I think, a lot for Alabama to figure out through the first 3 weeks. And so, and then on top of that, not only just the game itself, but I'm very interested in this coaching matchup, right? Kalen DeBoer, offensive mastermind, fantastic play caller. One of the things I noticed just watching a lot of the Washington games last year, the guy makes in-game adjustments very, very well. So what's that chess match going to be like, right? Because I remember watching the SEC championship game, and it's just, Georgia carved up Alabama on that first drive, and then the offense did nothing, So expert in-game adjustment there from Saban. Kirby didn't exactly come with the counterpunch until it was, too little too late, right? Can DeBoer do the same thing? What's the counterpunch look like from Kirby? I don't know, man. There's just so much about this game that's so intriguing, just where it's at on the schedule, who the teams are, who the coaches are. This is, baptism by fire. Welcome to the SEC. And the other thing too that comes to mind, Kalen DeBoer's coaching record against other really good coaches is very good. His record overall is fantastic, but he beat Dan Lanning twice last year. He beat Steve Sarkisian in the playoff, right? The guy knows how to handle these big games and these big moments against other big time coaches. And so, hey, next up, Kirby Smart, week 4, 2024. Or at least the 4th game. I think it's more week 5. It's the end of September. So
under the radar matchup, I thought, or storyline, Travaris Robinson being on the other side, a big part of the adjustments that were made in that SEC championship, a guy Alabama wanted to keep. There's no doubt about that. Very interested to see how that sort of plays out, because I do think there's going to be a Kane Womack versus Travaris and Schumann kind of thing that might fly a little under the radar going into the game, but could, in a big way, determine the outcome of the game. Because Georgia's offense, I think has the potential to be potent, especially when we're talking about getting 4 or 5 weeks into the season and able to get some rhythm there.
Yeah. So I'm glad that there's a bye before this game because we're going to have 2 weeks worth of, I mean, we're going to have more than 2 weeks worth of content for this game alone, but like we're going to have 2 weeks to really kind of build up the coverage and write some really good stuff going into that game. So, yeah, that's the easy number one pick. Now the draft truly begins because there's so many different options that you could go at number two. I think I'm going to go with the late October Missouri game.
Ooh,
It's
okay.
before another bye. I'm going them number two overall. Just because I believe in this Missouri team. Like I know they lost Cody Schrader, but they went to the portal, grabbed Texas State running back to kind of plug and play, replace him. They've got Luther Burden, who, now that Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas are gone, probably the best wide receiver in the SEC. You could probably argue that he's the best receiver in the country. Like I think he's going to be a Biletnikoff candidate. I think he's got Heisman Trophy potential. I don't know that he'll be a finalist, but like he's good enough to make, enough plays and, really kind of anchor that Missouri offense, especially the way he did last year. Brady Cook's back after throwing for 3,000 yards. They've got dudes on the defense. The defense I thought was sneaky good last year, right? Top 5 in the SEC, 5th in total defense, 4th in scoring defense. Added some portal guys like Toriano Pride from Clemson, the cornerback coming back home. He's originally from St. Louis. I just really like this Missouri team. And then you look at where this game falls on the schedule, late October. Alabama will have been plenty battle tested by then, right? We talked about they go to Wisconsin week 3, talked about the Georgia game. Before this Missouri game, they got to go to Tennessee, right? Third Saturday in October. There's a very real chance that if you look at Missouri's schedule, that the Tigers might be undefeated top 5, at least top 10 in the country coming into this matchup at Bryant-Denny Stadium. And that, talk about another big game, another big moment for Kalen DeBoer in the gang. Like, there's just something about this matchup that's like, this could be really, really fun.
I think it could be a shootout. I think it could be a lot of fun in that respect. There are 2 things that hold me up about Missouri. I do think they're going to be really good this year. I wonder how much of it is by virtue of schedule than anything else. You talk about Alabama will have been battle tested. I'm going to read their schedule before they get to Alabama because it is unbelievable. Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vanderbilt, Texas A&M, UMass, Auburn. That's whatever the opposite of battle tested is. That's it. And I mean, that's just I worry about their ability to get prepared, to be prepared for a game like that on the road, right? Like they will have gone to Kyle Field in Texas A&M, but that's we don't know what they're going to be with a coaching change there. And then the other thing is the change of defensive coordinator. You talked about them being sneaky good on defense. Then they lose their coordinator at LSU. You get a guy in Batoon back who's got good credentials, but you wonder about what they're going to be, the pieces they lost in the draft. I do think it's a really interesting game. We talked about the betting lines last week. It was a one that I kind of looked at weirdly because Alabama, 8.5-point favorite, felt a little high to me. Nonetheless, I think it's one of the more intriguing games and kind of maybe a little bit off the board in terms of if you're going to pick games the second most interesting. But I think you've got a good rationale for why, because we're going to focus on all the other ones in a big way, but this Missouri one could go a long way in determining the outcome of the season, whether they're in that playoff mix or not.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned Mizzou's schedule. I see 7-0, although we'll kind of see what happens with that Auburn game because every time Missouri plays Auburn runs for approximately 1,000 yards on them. So we'll see. But then after that Alabama game, Mizzou's got Oklahoma, South Carolina, Mississippi State, and then they finish with Arkansas. Like, this is a Mizzou team that's going to be like, I'm not saying they can get to the SEC championship game, but like, they're going to be in the playoff probably if they do what we think they're going to do. And this game do what?
Here's going to be weird. Like, I'm not calling it. Somebody can dig up the podcast if we get to this point. If we get to playoff debates and resumes, and Alabama's got 2 losses and has beaten Missouri, and Missouri's only losses to Alabama, the debate on seeding is going to be unbelievable because their schedule you can just pick apart to death.
Yeah.
And if that's why, in a sense, like, it's an important game for Alabama. It's a huge game for Missouri because if you lose it, you don't have a lot of other big games to hang your hat on. If you win it, you're golden.
Yeah. So you went into Tuscaloosa to knock off Alabama. Yeah, it's more or less Mizzou season. And, in the case of Alabama, like it's going to be a big one because they're going to be undefeated, likely undefeated, and they're going to be a pretty good team. So I don't know. I like that one. I know maybe it's not sneaky anymore that I'm sitting here talking about it, but I really like that matchup and I'm very intrigued by it. Who do you have at number 3? What's your third pick?
Let's just go week 3 of the season. And it's for not necessarily as much football reasons as it is like I just want to see Wisconsin. Like I want to see jump around. I love the out of conference games. I'm scared in this era of realignment and expanded playoff that they're a little bit in a weird spot where I don't know if ADs are gonna really feel pushed to schedule good games like this. Alabama's done a really good job of that recently, but very interesting game. Going to be the biggest test to that point. They're going to figure some things out against Western Kentucky and South Florida, but going on the road, early game, Luke Fickle there, really interesting program in a weird spot, but could be a big test for Alabama. And again, there's that potential for like where's their head at because you are going into a bye. You do have Georgia on the other side of it. You're going to assume that they're mentally ready, but not overlooking a team in a situation going on the road that could be really dicey. And there's going to be a lot of attention on that, right? Like the Georgia game is going to way outweigh everything else. But like that Wisconsin game is going to have a lot of eyeballs on. Big noon game, the first prime time type game for Kalen DeBoer and this new staff. I think that's going to be a really interesting game. And it lines up. Third pick, week 3. Let's do it.
And it kind of, what intrigues me about the first 3 games of the season, and we'll eventually get to the first 2, but like Western Kentucky, South Florida, and then at Wisconsin, a lot of good quarterbacks that this defense and like the young guys, especially on the defense, like you are baptism by fire, like pretty quickly right out of the gate. And then especially Wisconsin, 11 a.m. at Camp Randall. Tyler Van Dyke, now quarterback for Wisconsin, right? Transferred him from Miami. Top 2 receivers for Wisconsin are back this year. Defense competent, right? Like top 40 in total defense, top 25 in scoring defense last year. So we'll kind of see like this is a fun test game. Like I would think that, Alabama should probably win it just based on talent, but we'll kind of see what Luke Fickle can do, right? Like this is a guy that likes to chuck the ball around the yard a little bit. There could be some young guys in Alabama secondary. Who knows if they'll have everything figured out from a communication standpoint by week 3. There's a lot to like about that game. Like I see that as, maybe not the easy number 3, but I totally see why that's the third pick here in this draft.
Yeah, the Tyler Van Dyke angle is interesting because there is a little bit of backstory that if he had gone into the portal, I think Alabama would have been one of those teams a year ago that would have wanted to take him, just because there was so much unknown at the quarterback position at that time. And you're right that it's a big test for the secondary, especially like it's not just Wisconsin likes to throw the ball over the yard. It's young guys in a grueling kind of environment that is going to test your ability to focus. Really interested to see how they respond to that. I think Alabama's going to be favored. I don't think we have an early line on that game, if I'm remembering correctly. But a test nonetheless that will tell us where they're at that point going into a bye week. You win that game and you win it convincingly, feel really good going into Georgia. If you win and it's sloppy, or if you, God forbid, you lose, that bye week's going to feel real long, and then you've got Georgia on the other side of it, and it's that get a little gloomy early in the season.
Could be, yeah. I remember like after Alabama lost to Texas last year, like it was the sky hadn't falling, but it was like hanging on by a thread, because with 14 playoff, like no 2-loss team had ever gotten there. So it's like, all right, Alabama's got to run the table and they got to be perfect. If they lose at Wisconsin, like I don't know if it totally shoots the season in the foot, but like it does add pressure because that's you still got the whole SEC slate coming up next after that.
Oh yeah, after the Texas game, obituaries were being written on Alabama. It was over, and then the USF game obviously played a big role in that. But no, you're right. It's the expanded playoff gives you leeway, but some of my former colleagues might not believe in momentum. I do when it comes to a young team and a new coaching staff, and that's going to be a big one in terms of having momentum and confidence. Maybe more important than momentum for the rest of the season. They can go in and win a game like that.
Agreed. 4th overall pick in our 2024 scheduled draft. I'm taking the game at Tennessee. Third Saturday in October in Knoxville at Neyland Stadium. That in itself, like, is going to be interesting because last time Alabama was there, they lost that tremendous game, you know, on the last, 2-3 plays of the game. Tennessee had the walk-off field goal. So you've got that angle to it, right? It's probably, you know, I know they go to Wisconsin, but that's probably, you know, they go to Vanderbilt 2 weeks before then, but that's probably the first like big road SEC game for DeBoer. How does he handle that? It's going to be two offensive minds going head to head with each other, DeBoer and Josh Heupel. And then on top of that, like, Tennessee's just an interesting team to me, right? Like, they've got on defense, they've got James Pierce Jr., right? Who edge rusher, hailed by many as probably a future top 5 NFL draft pick next year. I think there's a lot of draft nicks that really think he's probably the best pound for pound player coming out in next year's draft. So you got that problem that you got to deal with. But then on top of that, like, the offense is still very good. Like, there's weapons there. Like Nico, I'm going to butcher this name, but I'm going to try my best to pronounce it. Nico Iamaleava, I think. I probably butchered that. We'll just call him Nico. The quarterback from California. He was wrapped up in the NIL thing. So he's a quarterback. He looked really, really good against Iowa in the bowl game last year. I know that wasn't the full-fledged Iowa defense, but if you're able to carve up a defense that plays as disciplined as they do, you're a pretty good quarterback. Dylan Sampson at running back is back. And Nico's going to be able to throw to Brew McCoy, Squirrel White. They brought in that 2-lane receiver as well. There's a lot to like about this Tennessee team. I don't know how good they're going to be. But that's a fun road test for Alabama, and it could be pretty important in the grand scheme of the SEC next season. So there's a lot of angles to that game that I'm really intrigued by.
Absolutely. I think it's if I wasn't going to pick Wisconsin, it was going to be Tennessee for that third pick because it is. I think it's going to be a game that they're going to have circled on their calendar again. I think Georgia. I think a lot of teams in the SEC are going to be saying, "Oh, licking their chops, rubbing their hands together. It's time to knock off Alabama." You know, they've beaten them before recently, 2 years ago. But I think it's going to be like, hey, let's get them while they're down kind of thing. My question for Tennessee, like, I just can't get the loss that they had, or Alabama's win is the other way of putting it, in Bryant-Denny last season. That second half was as poor a performance by a coaching staff as I've seen in a really long time. Like, they had the ability to go in Bryant-Denny, beat Alabama. They had all the momentum, and they just stopped. They didn't pressure Alabama on the offensive side of the ball. They just accepted that they were limited in ways that I don't think they were limited. I understand that Joe Milton was not a complete quarterback, but they didn't really attempt to do anything. It was very conservative. And since when do we associate that with Josh Heupel? Like, they came in 2 years ago and just lit the place on fire in terms of throwing the football around. Yeah, you had Hooker who was perfect for that offense. Maybe Nico's that guy. But that game made me take a step back and go, is this Tennessee program really poised to take over and be a upper echelon program? Because look, you're going to have rosters that ebb and flow. You're going to have games you're not supposed to win. That was a game it felt like you've got to find a way to win as a coaching staff. And I was pretty disappointed just in terms of the X's and O's of not really – it didn't look like they put their pedal to the metal and tried to beat Alabama. And I know people could take offense to that and maybe saw something that wasn't there. But Alabama stole the momentum and Tennessee just gave up, it felt like. And, yeah, this game's on the road, but I wonder what they're going to be this year because everything's kind of lining up. And, you know, I know Nico's a young quarterback, but they do have talent. So on paper, they should be in some ways better getting that game at home. But I just can't get that game out of my head because I was just very disappointed in Heupel and the way they performed. So I think the line on that one, Alabama 2-point favorite, feels about right.
Yeah. Well, and two trains of thought here before we move into the fifth pick. One, that 2022 Tennessee game where Tennessee beat Alabama, Alex Golish was the offensive coordinator. He was one calling plays that game. So now he's at South Florida doing the thing with the Bulls. Maybe kind of speaks to having him on that staff, right? Especially in a game like that where he just he found the weakness and he continued to spam it, which leads to my second thought. Joe Milton is not Hendon Hooker. Hendon Hooker scared me a lot more than Joe Milton did. And also Jalen Hyatt scared me a lot more than, Brew McCoy or Squirrel White. And I know Milton had that one really nice throw early in the game last year, but then after that, he was more or less a statue, right? So, I wonder if just, Hendon Hooker and Jalen Hyatt and just the personnel from that 2022 game maybe broaden the playbook a little bit and just the coaches could call certain things. Whereas like with Joe Milton, like for as talented and as strong as that arm is, maybe a little bit limited. So I wonder just, was there only so much they could do or only so much that they felt like they could do?
My pushback on that is this. Why couldn't they build an offense around him? Alabama figured out what to do with Jalen Milroe, who not a complete quarterback at the beginning of last year. They figured it out. And why you couldn't do that with a guy who was 6'5", 230, could throw the ball 90 yards, and could run, and you didn't do it. And it's too early to say this, and it's not a completely negative connotation. I just wonder if Heupel and Tennessee is the same thing as Gus and Auburn, where it's this interesting offense that works when you have a really good quarterback, but doesn't work at all when you don't. So you can be scary every now and then, and you can make a run, but you're not consistently there. Again, it's too early, but I see shades of it because it is the uniqueness of the offense. It is the early splash of being a team that pushed for the playoff. If an injury doesn't happen at South Carolina, maybe they're in and Alabama's out. There's a little bit of what's this going to be as a program, and it does remind me a little bit of when Gus was at Auburn because there were similar things at play.
It's a good point. They're going to be an interesting team to watch, especially now that they got Nico for at least 2, probably 3 more years. So we'll see what happens. Who do you have? What game do you have with the 5th overall pick in this draft?
Let's keep it close to home. I think it's LSU. I think it's that's going to be yet another, it's the game every year, right? And we can dig into what LSU might be or what they won't be, but going on the road there, setting you up for the final push of the season, coming out of a Missouri game, what are you going to be? Death Valley's just a bear, and more so than the players and how they respond to that. How's a Nick Sheridan going to respond to that? How's a Kane Womack going to respond to that? Kane's going to be tested by this offense. I have no doubt about that. Just because of what they're able to do, how multiple they're able to be. But it's going to be a pivotal game. There's no doubt about that. The Oklahoma game will be the last maybe big one. That might be the last ranked game they play, potentially, is LSU, because I'm not a huge believer in Oklahoma, to be honest with you. That to me is going to be, that's a game that we could have put 1 or 2 on this list. Just for various reasons, we kind of went a different direction, but going to be really fascinating to see how that one plays out.
Yeah. Well, you look at the, LSU offense, like who were the big players last year? Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, they're all gone to the NFL. Logan Diggs, their star running back last year, he's gone to LSU now. So they still got Nussmeier. I want to see what more he has. I know he's not Jaden Daniels, but what can he do? How can he operate within this offense? Does the offense change at all now that the personnel's a lot different? They still got Josh Williams back at running back. Kyron Lacey still there at receiver. He's really, really good. Mason Taylor at tight end. Will Campbell at offensive tackle, another guy who's projected to go pretty high in the NFL draft. They got dudes on defense that have been misused, but I'm very curious to see how the LSU defense looks now that they've got brand new coaches in, new literally staff just all up and down. Was able to pluck Missouri's defensive coordinator. Are they able to use Harold Perkins properly? Are they able to use Major Burns properly? They got another cornerback in from A&M, Jordan Gilbert. Are they able to use these guys in a way? And by this point in the schedule, right, they play November 9th. They should have a lot of this stuff figured out, right? The defense should, at that point, the defense will be what the defense will be. So maybe that helps DeBoer and the offense when it comes to game planning, because they'll kind of know what the strengths and weaknesses are. And I guess same thing goes for the offense. Like you'll kind of know by then what Nussmeier can and can't do. You'll know by then, is it going to be more of a tight end run offense through Mason Taylor, or is Kyron Lacey going to pop off and be the next great LSU receiver? I like that game. I also like where it's at on the schedule, because I think by then we're just going to know so much about both teams.
I think Kyron is going to be a stud. I think he's really good. I think he's the next in line. I think we talked about it on last week's pod, maybe. The offensive tackles, their offensive line is going to be very good. Will Campbell, I think, could be a number one pick. Quarterbacks always go number one, it feels like, but he might be the first non-quarterback taken. He's that good. I think Emory Jones is another really good offensive tackle they have, came in the same time as Will. So there's a lot of pieces there. And Nussmeier can make every throw in the book. The question is how often he's going to throw it to the other team, because he's got this Farvian just let it rip streak, which I personally love. But like, I just wonder, Brian Kelly's very meticulous as a offensive mind, and how he's going to respond to those potential turnovers. And if he puts too much pressure on that, do you kind of have a square peg round hole kind of thing going on where it doesn't quite fit, or Nuss is trying to be something he's not? I don't know if they have the pieces on defense. I'm not as sold on that, like, because I can't believe they're trying to move Harold Perkins inside again. Let him be what he is. Let him be an athlete and play football. I mean, just let him do that. Let him play in space. He can cover a slot receiver and rush the quarterback. Who can do that? Why would you put him in the middle of traffic and have him do 14 different things when the other things he can do are better than almost everyone else in college football? Like, just keep it simple, stupid. Like, I think that's where they're at. But what gives me some hope for them, if they don't have the pieces, they have better coaches. Like I said, the Missouri coach going back there, Blake, really good defensive coordinator. And oh, by the way, familiar face and maybe one of the top assistants in college football, Bo Davis, going back to LSU, a guy Alabama would have loved to have back every year since he left, because it has not, in a way, been the same since then. One of the best developers of talent, one of the best recruiters, just a great defensive line coach. So you wonder, can he have a year one sort of impact? I think they'll still be pretty bad on defense, but I think their future is bright.
I like that. I like that. No, that'll be a lot to like about that game. A lot that's going to be intriguing about that game. 6th overall pick in our draft. I'm going to go at Oklahoma 2 weeks after that LSU game. I don't know if Oklahoma is going to be good. I know that they have a quarterback that they're excited about, Jackson Arnold. Their leading rusher is back. Nick Anderson at receiver is back. He caught 10 touchdowns last year. They more or less portaled the entire offensive line, or at least the interior. The defense, I think, should be better. That's Brent Venables. Like, that's just his calling card. That's what he designed all those great Clemson defenses under Dabo back when they were winning and contending for titles. They picked up Dominic Williams, the defensive tackle out of TCU, through the portal. So now they've got kind of their big anchor in the middle there. I don't know about this Oklahoma team. It's going to be intriguing to see how they adjust to the SEC. I think Texas is kind of made and built ready to go, but also Oklahoma beat them last year in Red River. So it's like, okay, like, what version of Oklahoma are, we going to see, one, against the SEC next year, and two, like, we're going to know about them by late November, right? They play on November 23rd. We're going to know a lot about this Oklahoma team. Are they going to be good? I don't know, but it's a road game. They're going to be game. I'd like to think that Venables is going to have the defense playing better than they did last year. And, if Jackson Arnold is as good as the Sooners believe he can be, it'll be an interesting matchup against Kane Wommack's defense. So I don't know. There's something about this game that's just like, like, I don't know if it falls under the trap game because it comes right after the Mercer game and before the Auburn game. But potentially there's trap potential there.
No, there's going to be like a vibes check on that one, where it's like, if Alabama's playing well, I think it's a dangerous game, because it's like, okay, do you think the season's over? Because it's not. That's a tough place to go in and play and win. I'm just not sold on Oklahoma in the SEC. To be perfectly honest with you, I don't know about their ability to recruit that type of talent across the board, the depth you need. We've heard Sark talk about this. He's hammered it home for like 3 years now. Like, we need bodies. Like, we need certain type of bodies to get ready for this. And I don't know that Oklahoma has them yet. And I don't know what the program is. They had an abysmal first year under Venables. And maybe I can't get that taste out of my mouth. Maybe I'm nitpicking it, but outside of the Texas win, what was their big win last year? You beat a bad TCU team to end the season? Like, BYU's a solid win. Like, West Virginia's not very. You lose to Oklahoma State, like then you lose your quarterback, and then it's like, who's the dude? Like, who's the guy who scares you? And on top of all of that, in a way, being at the tail end of the season can help them, right? Because you do have a new quarterback, and maybe you figured some things out. You're on the tail end of an SEC schedule now, and the physicality of that week in and week out is just different, especially in the trenches. How healthy are they going to be? How mentally there are they going to be? Getting them at home, getting that game at home for them should be a big help in that respect. I just have huge question marks about what they are this year. Maybe we're overhyping them. Not me, because I clearly don't like them very much. But like, but also like, what are they going to be long term? Because they're in a really tricky spot. I think every team coming into a new conference is in a tricky spot, but because of the uneven results of a coaching staff, the questions about recruiting for the SEC, the body types you need, really curious to see how they respond to that. I think Venables is as tenacious a head coach as there is, so there's reason to believe that he can figure it out. But at the same time, hasn't really had the proven results yet. Still early in his tenure as a head coach. Very curious where they land, not just this year but long term.
You look at Oklahoma's schedule; they got Temple, Houston, Tulane, and then their SEC openers. They host Tennessee September 21st.
Yeah.
Let's say Jackson Arnold comes and sets the world on fire those first 3 weeks against Temple, Houston, and Tulane. Tulane might be pretty tough.
Yeah.
But then you have to the other thing too that, I think Sark has this taken care of just because we've seen the results from him. What I'm really curious about with Oklahoma, Venables, like not only just having them ready, but like you mentioned it, like them going through the SEC schedule, like the coaching matchups, like how are you going to adjust playing SEC after SEC after SEC? I mean, look at Oklahoma's SEC schedule. You ready for this? Tennessee, at Auburn, Texas, South Carolina, at Ole Miss, at Missouri, host Alabama, then they finish at LSU.
Yeah.
Like, have fun, guys.
The Big 12, this is not.
No.
This is not West Virginia. This is, I mean, all respect to Neil Brown, but they've been struggling for a while. It's different. I mean, going on the road to Missouri 2 weeks before, you do get the bye week there that helps them, I guess. Could feel really sore with that much time off. I don't know, but it's different, man, and it's going to be a lot of hype, especially if you win those first 3 games. But if you bottom out, if you lose to Texas, it's a little shaky, right? Because South Carolina's interesting. The Ole Miss game, very interesting. Like, we all expect a lot out of them. So where are they going to be at in terms of competitiveness? What's left to play for that season? And just the exhaustive nature of everybody being focused on you and judging you week in and week out as far as, are you ready for the SEC? That's going to take its toll.
Yeah, be interesting to watch, and especially that game near the end of Alabama's schedule. All right, number 7 overall pick. What are you going with?
It's tempting to go really in the weeds for some of these other games, but I think you just got to keep it simple, right? It's Auburn. Like, it's the end of the season. It's, getting them at home helps. That line, that 15-point favorite line, is just wild to me. And I know it's an early line. It will change. Maybe it won't. Maybe Auburn will be really bad. Maybe it won't. Or Alabama will be great, and then it looks brilliant. But that game's always weird. Like, there's no way around it. It's just the rivalry game, the aspect of it. The first time DeBoer and this staff is going to get a taste of that, they're just going to get asked 15 million questions, including from us, like, about how are you preparing for it? I don't think you can prepare for it. And Auburn's a really interesting team, right? Like, scared the daylights out of some teams last year, not just Alabama, but had Georgia on the ropes for a team that was, I think, less talented than they're going to be this year. I still don't understand why they didn't make a push to add another quarterback. Peyton Thorne was very underwhelming last year, but they're saying all the right things about having Hugh calling plays. Don't tell Lane Kiffin that, because they'll get mad about Nick's leaving. Being more detailed on offense and upgrading the talent at receiver. You bring in Lambert Smith, the Penn State transfer. He can play, but you got some really young guys. The freshmen come in at receiver. how much better can they be? They were a team that was very much lacking talent this year, and I think they're improving in that respect. Alabama's much further along, even though new coach, but the talent overall is going to be much better. But just such a tricky game. You end the season there, and our playoff hope's going to be on the line there. There's an SEC championship berth potentially going to be on the line there. We know weird things can happen there, so no sense in overthinking it. I think that's my pick here.
Yeah, I like that. There's a lot of intrigue about this Auburn team because you mentioned like they're probably going to be more talented this year, but even with a comparative talent deficit last year, like we all saw what happened to Jordan Hare, 4th and 31, the way Auburn was playing leading up to that. Peyton Thorne's back. Like he's a dude that can run and throw. Now he's got, Cam Coleman. There's all sorts of excitement about him, the true freshman receiver. He's probably going to be a go-to guy. And by that point in the season, he'll have adjusted to not only college football, but probably life in the SEC as well. So how impactful can he be? What's it going to be like going up against Alabama's secondary? Will they have their stuff figured out by then? You would hope so in the last week of the season. Jarquez Hunter is back. He's, talented running back, right? Hugh Freeze is going to know how to use him. Even with, not as talented a roster last year, Auburn still ran for 244 yards on Alabama. So like, is Alabama going to have a run defense? We really like the defensive line. We like the depth there. We like the production, even if they maybe lack a game wrecker. But like Hugh Freeze knows how to open up holes, right? Motion-based run offense, and it works, and it has worked. And he found a way to beat Saban twice doing that type of offense.
Yeah.
What's it going to be like here? Do we potentially see a shootout? Do we see just a weird Iron Bowl at Bryant-Denny? Auburn tends to struggle at Bryant-Denny more so, than when the game's played at Jordan-Hare. Yeah. So there's a lot to like about this game.
Well, and you talk about running lanes. Late in the season, they tend to be a little bit more gaping because of the injuries, the fatigue, all of those things that kind of go into that. I think this game is really going to come down to Peyton Thorne and his growth. It's weird to say for a guy who's been around football so long, but last year was just so painfully obvious, and I don't like this about him. How little he trusted his receivers. I think that played a big role and how limited their offense was. And there's good reason. Like they weren't really that talented at receiver a year ago. But does he change considerably knowing that he's got dudes who can make plays? Because let's remember, he was a much better football player at Michigan State that first year under Mel Tucker when, it helps having Kenneth Walker behind you to hand the ball to. I don't think as good as Jarquez Hunter can be, I don't think he's that. But can Peyton Thorne be a guy who can make some plays through the air? I think Hugh Freeze can scheme him in the running game in a way that can hurt anybody, especially Alabama at that point in the season. But can Peyton make enough plays through the air at that point? How far along has Alabama's secondary come as a tangent of that, or in directly with that? Honestly, I think that'll go a long way in determining this game. It could get weird. But you're right. Auburn does tend to struggle in Bryant-Denny, and maybe their hopes have faded by then because I do think they're another year away from being potentially a contender. Still, it's the rival game. You can't overlook it.
Yeah, lot to like about that matchup. I think with the number 8 overall pick, I don't mind getting in the weeds. I'm picking that South Florida game week 2. Number 8 overall. There's obviously the redemption arc, right? Because that game in Tampa last year in the rain was just trash. Like I remember Rodak and I were both there, and I remember looking at it multiple times. I'm like, this team is not going anywhere if they can't do anything against this South Florida team, right? First year under Golish, you caught them early in the season. It was a team that really didn't know what they were yet. Golish is an offensive mind, not to say that he, doesn't pay too much attention to the defense, but like we tend to see that trend a little bit in the college ranks. And Alabama just couldn't do anything, like nothing. And so you got that redemption arc, right? Because now South Florida's coming to Bryant-Denny. And also just like, this will be a fun test, one of 3 fun tests early in the season for the defense, right? We're really going to kind of get to see what they're made of because Alex Golish, right? Calling plays for South Florida. Byron Brown's a dude, man. The quarterback there threw for 3,200 yards last year, rushed for over 800 more, had 37 total touchdowns. They got a talented running back, Naquan Wright, who's back. They got a talented or at least experienced receiver in Sean Atkins, who is back. We know Golish knows how to scheme up offenses. Like this could be a fun test at home for the defense, like how good are you against a guy that is widely considered to be a very, very good play caller? I don't know. I think that's a fun week 2 matchup for a few different reasons, but especially like, time to grow up defense. Like, are you ready for this? And if they can succeed against that, then you have more confidence going into the Wisconsin game. If not, then it's like, okay, like, do we have to reset season expectations 2 weeks in? There's a lot on the line in this game.
Yeah, I like the early season tests for the defense because they're winnable, but can learn a lot. Even if you struggle, you can struggle and win, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Um, so that part of it is really interesting to me. I think why this game might not get as hairy as last year's. I think the offense is just going to be better and more prepared to make adjustments. I think this staff is just, I think they know a little bit more how to do that kind of thing. And it's not a huge knock on Tommy Reese and those guys. They were just trying to figure it out, and they had a quarterback they didn't really know what they were kind of had total package what to work with. He wasn't as developed at that point. Oh, by the way, he wasn't even on the field.
Yeah, didn't play
So
that
we
game.
talk about redemption for Alabama. This is redemption for Jalen Milrow. I'm very curious. He probably won't say a word about it because he's very coach speak. Not a knock on him. He's just very going to play it straight down the middle. There's got to be a big part of him that's still like, okay, you benched me last year for this game. This is the thing that's everybody's going to talk about. Every story that's ever written about me in college is going to be how I was benched. That's the beginning of my redemption. Let's just wipe that clean. Let's show everybody if I would have played in that game what it would have looked like. Because he's got the confidence. He's got to think that, man, if I'd played, it wouldn't have looked like that. He's going to get that opportunity to show it in obviously a very different setting, very different circumstance. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a guy who wants to go out there and just set the world on fire to kind of get that palate cleanser. So personal redemption maybe playing part of that.
I like that. And that also kind of leads to, this South Florida team, like I think they're going to be scrappy. I think they're going to be pretty good based on just kind of where they're at in the hierarchy of college football, right? Different neighborhood than what we believe Alabama's probably going to be this upcoming season. Can the offense step on its neck, right? Like, can you just this would be an early game against a team that probably has no business being on the same field as you. Can you just, a confident, like 45-14, like, can you just run it up? Like, can the offense go do what it needs to do to put points on the board, to build confidence, to get the fan base excited early in the season? Like, can you just go take care of business? Like, this is also one of those games to me too. Like, you need to go out there and impose your will and step on their necks and move on and get ready for Wisconsin. Like, that's kind of what this game also is to me. Like, in addition to all the redemptive stuff. So like, obviously they played it horribly last year. Can Milrow come in and set the world on fire? Can the defense stop what we believe is a pretty talented quarterback? And can the offense just go and flex its muscles and just take care of business? That's the other thing too that makes this game so intriguing, especially early in the year. So
Everything you just said is exactly why Western Kentucky is my next pick, is because it's ace the first test. It's like being in school. You don't want to bomb the first test, and you're just digging your way out the whole time. Like, take care of business against Western Kentucky. Show that you can be all these things, and there'll be tests down the line, and there'll be times where you stumble, but get out the gate strong, and it's going to be, we're going to get our first taste of everything in that game, and it's not going to be the big test as the other ones are. That's why it falls this late in our draft, but like Kalen DeBoer leading the team out on the field? Is it going to be ACDC still playing? Is that going to change? Like Jalen Milrow, what's he going to look like? This new and improved version of him. What's the offensive line look like? Is Parker Brailsford back? Is he engaged? Caden Proctor's back after a weird offseason. What does this 4-2-5 defense look like? How many of those freshmen are playing? Can Jeremy Bernard be a stud? Like, I can get myself all worked up because we've had all these questions, and we're going to spend the next 101 days talking about them. We'll start to get answers there. It won't be every answer. It won't be permanent, but it'll be our first big test of it. So that's why it's one of the more intriguing things to me. Not a game you really look at and say, oh, they're in danger of losing, but they can start off on the right foot and create some confidence really early coming out of the gates with a dominant performance there rather than, oh no, even mildly shaky, people are going to lose their minds and say, "Oh, Saban, this wouldn't have happened. Oh no, they're not ready." Like, nip that in the bud. Don't let it happen. Take care of business week 1.
Yeah, I like that. Western Kentucky and at number 9 in our pick. The other thing that makes this Western Kentucky, you talk about, going in there, taking care of business, stepping on their neck, open the season with a really big win. I've hinted at this, right, with the South Florida game, with the Wisconsin game. The secondary is probably the part of the defense that we're just kind of like, what's it look like? How are they going to play? Like it's not going to be Saban's pattern match man defense. It's going to be a lot more zone, keeping things in front of you. This Western Kentucky team could throw it around the yard, man. Like you look back, 2019, they had Ty Story throw for 2,500 yards. 2021, they had Bailey Zappi throw for almost 6,000 yards and 60 touchdowns. Like Austin Reed is not that, but he still threw for, basically 8,000 yards over the last 2 seasons combined, 71 total touchdowns the last 2 years. So they've got, a couple of really talented receivers who are coming back that are going to test that secondary, especially if it's a lot of the younger guys playing, but just in general, because there's so many new bodies. TJ Finley is a guy that transferred in. He could be QB1 for them. If not him, Caden Veltkamp, who got a little bit of playing time next year. Like there's, we've hinted at this, that the secondary specifically, but the defense really as a whole is going to be tested the first 3 weeks. Like Western Kentucky right out of the gate, we're going to learn a lot about that secondary right away. And that's, to me, that's kind of exciting just because of how much attrition and turnover there's been at that part of the defense.
Yeah, I don't think it was scheduled this way, but again, for probably the millionth time, it's really good in a sense that they get these early tests in a spot where they need to learn in a hurry. You're going to figure out, can these freshmen contribute right away? Do we need to lean on some of the more experienced guys? I mean, they're all sort of new in a sense, but some of them have played more college football than others. So, no, definitely a lot of under the radar sort of storylines to watch on that one. And we'll, this even before week 1, will we get a depth chart? Like that'll be interesting. If you get your binoculars and look in the press box, we'll all be like looking down and trying to make one as furiously as possible.
With the 10th overall pick in this draft, we're about done here. I'm going with the road game at Vanderbilt. One, Nashville, right? Like I don't know that Vanderbilt hadn't had a winning season since 2013. They've had a couple of 500 seasons where they've been able to get to a bowl game, but that's just kind of where the program's at right now. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, maybe a few things wrong with that, but that's just kind of what it is, right? But here's what makes this game kind of interesting to me. They did pick up Diego Pavia out of the transfer portal, right? Diego Pavia from New Mexico State threw for about 3,000 yards last year, ran for another 900 yards, 33 total touchdowns last year for New Mexico State. The same New Mexico State that beat Auburn, right? Like that was the big hullabaloo before the Iron Bowl last year, Jordan Hare. You can kind of group this in with like the Byron Brown and, some of the other quarterbacks that they're going to see. Nico from Tennessee. We'll see if Nussmeier and Brady Cook do a little bit more of the same thing with Jackson Arnold. But like Diego Pavia, very clearly a mobile quarterback. If there's one thing that Saban's defense has really struggled with over the last 17 years, it was quarterbacks that just mobile quarterbacks. Like as soon as they got out of the pocket, they were like wreaking havoc, right? Because it's like Saban's defense has all these rules. And while I'm sure they had scramble rules whenever the quarterback got out of the pocket, it seemed like sometimes, not all times, but sometimes the defense would just panic because they just wouldn't know what to do with a mobile quarterback. And so Vanderbilt may not have a ton going for them, but like Diego Pavia is going to have an opportunity to play in the SEC and wreak some havoc, right? And I think that's just, again, earlier in the season. I guess it's early October, so by then we're pretty well into the thick of the season. But that's a fun test for this defense against another mobile quarterback and a guy that's obviously going to be the central focus of this offense on the road in SEC play. How do you handle that, right? Can you go in there and take care of business against a Vanderbilt team that you should squash like a bug? Or is Pavia going to give you some issues? And, then you look down the line and it's like, all right, like how many other mobile quarterbacks are they going to have to deal with this year? That's what makes that game intriguing to me. It's kind of obviously it went 10th out of 12 in our draft for a reason, but hey, we can find ways to make these games interesting.
Yeah, a road game too, so there's always some intrigue with that. I agree with your reasons why. It's also why we're going to skip ahead because we're going to make these other ones short because we're at the tail end of it. But it's kind of why I'm interested in South Carolina, which is our next pick, which would, I don't know what number we're at now.
I've done number 11 if you're picking
Number
South
11.
Carolina.
Okay, South Carolina, it's the same sort of reason, right? It is you get the game at home, but you get a new quarterback in Lenore Sellers, and they got Rocket Sanders from Arkansas. You've got two pieces there. If you want to run an option sort of game, I think could be really interesting. And it's that kind of it's almost like a swing game if you want to split the season in half. You play really well there. Then you're going on the road to Missouri. Then you get the Tennessee, Missouri, LSU swing, which is going to be enormous. So in a sense, it's an interesting game there. And their program, South Carolina, we're all sort of I think waiting to see can they take that next step. They're probably still a year away from that because of the quarterback situation, but they have improved their talent. I don't think there's any real question about that. Just going out and winning those big games for Beamer and that staff. So I think there's a defensive component to how's Alabama going to stop the potential quarterback run game and just the run game period with Rocket, but also like curious for me to see where South Carolina's at going into Bryant Denny. Pivotal game for them. If you find a way to sneak that one in, man, they're going to feel really good about themselves. They've had a few big wins already in Beamer's tenure, but like, can they get over that hump and start consistently winning those?
Yeah. A couple other interesting things about South Carolina. Robbie Ashford is now on their roster, so we'll see if he's QB1 by the time they play Alabama. And also Monkel Goodwine, obviously was on the tail end of Alabama's deep defensive line rotation. He decided to transfer out. We'll see if he's getting more playing time against South Carolina in that mid-October game. You make a good point about the, bye week, gearing up for Georgia, and then you get Vanderbilt, South Carolina, and then the 3 games in 4 weeks at Tennessee, Missouri, bye at LSU. There's a little bit of a wave to the season if you want to kind of structure it that way. The first 3 weeks, bye week, Georgia, and then, obviously by the end, I'm stuck with Mercer at the 12th overall pick. I have nothing to say about Mercer. I'm just going to stomach that and just move along with it. But
these games are interesting. Like that's always it's like being able to watch bowl practice. It's like you're going to wonder about all the freshmen who aren't really playing that much. That's going to be the game that if everything goes right, you'll get to see them. And you'll get to see a glimpse at the future. Is that a Zabian Brown, a Zay Mincy? Like, who's the guy who kind of flashes a little bit in that game? Does a Daniel Hill at running back show favorite here? Yeah, Cody Pumpkin about watching. Like, there are things to watch. It's a very like that. It's always a weird game because it's like toward the end of the season and you want stakes. It's not a big stakes game, but it's a big like future game, right? So do we get to see Ty Simpson? Do we get to see, the other quarterbacks in that game potentially if you take care of business early? There will be things to watch. It's just going to be things that only the diehard of the diehard and the people who are in the weeds are going to care about. Unless things go really bad.
Yikes.
It's going to be interesting for another reason.
I think in a perfect world, here's how I'll make the Mercer game interesting. In a perfect world, each quarterback gets a quarter. So you got Milroe in the first quarter. You got Simpson in the second quarter. By then, you're hoping at halftime that Alabama's up like 35 or 42-0. And then you get to see Dylan Lonergan in the third. How does he handle 3 series, maybe 4 series? And then you get Austin Mack in there, young 18-year-old Austin Mack in the fourth quarter. He gets 2, 3, 4 series, depending on how the defense is playing at that point. That would be an ideal scenario for the Mercer game. Get in, get out, 66-10, kind of a reset week before you finish up with Oklahoma and Auburn. That's the only way I think I can make that Mercer game interesting.
Maybe we'll get really like, okay, who's the third quarterback? It'll tell us the future. Is it Lonergan or Mack? Maybe by that point there's some behind the scenes competition. You hope you don't have injuries, like those kind of things. It's different. It's the tail end of the draft. But Mr. Irrelevant sometimes works out. Hello, Brock Purdy. So we'll see.
Give me Austin Mack in the fourth quarter and Daniel Hill in the fourth quarter taking all the carries, and I'll be happy with that Mercer game. There we go.
Size. And especially will stand out against Mercer.
To recap our 2024 Alabama schedule draft, Alex, you got Georgia at Wisconsin, at LSU, Auburn, Western Kentucky, South Carolina. I got Mizzou at Tennessee, at Oklahoma, USF, at Vanderbilt, and Mercer. I don't know how we judge winners and losers on this, but this was a lot of fun. It was kind of, we 101 days until week 1, but this was kind of fun just breaking down the schedule. And there's a lot of reasons to be intrigued and excited about it. Alabama upcoming, and the schedule is obviously part of that.
Absolutely. I think we'll judge by wins and losses, maybe, or maybe we'll just say I won right away. But I don't know. There are no winners and losers when you're in late May. It's just fun to talk about football, right?
Absolutely. That's all we've got today. We appreciate you guys tuning in and listening. We'll be back sometime next week. Rodak and I are going to continue a draft. I don't know if it's like a series or just the theme that we've been on. We're going to draft players off of Alabama's roster that we feel like are most important to the success of the team in 2024. And we're excluding the quarterbacks, right? Because we obviously know that the quarterbacks are probably going to be up there near the top, if not at the top, when it comes to most important to Alabama in 2024. So be sure to circle back next week for Rodak and I to discuss that. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review the show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247 and 247 Sports. You can get way fun content like this, like Alex's stories that he was able to write about DeBoer and OL Masterminds. We appreciate you guys always for listening and reading, and we will talk to you all again soon.